Yeah, so basically continuing the process here of rendering every element of the character. The process is very similar. I work a lot with the lasso tool. I try at this point not to go skimping on the layers and render out every element based on that simple principle that I have is establishing the lighting, main light source, which is the fire, and the secondary light source, the rim light, basically, that is the moon in this case. Bottom lit, as I was saying before, not underlit, but bottom lit. The character is bottom lit, so it's working those principles again and again. Basically, every element I don't really view with certain regard to the material, obviously, hair being hair and skin versus a shiny cap or a fabric hat. I take all these into account, but the principles are very much the same. Light source, light direction, and making sure that I render out the form with very simple principles. Make sure that my core lighting is there. Cast shadows, core shadows. The core shadows usually tend to be softer. The cast shadows tend to be, or at least in this case, because it's a fire, it's a very close light source and it's very strong. They tend to be sharper and less, not as soft. And yeah, basically continuing that process through every element of the character. I am investing a bit of time in the character right now. You can see me here. At some point I was thinking maybe I should have some leaves and create some foliage behind him because I wanted to silhouette him a bit better. But I kind of gave up that idea. I think I was driving past these forests when I was going on my trip, and they were all leafless trees and very gnarly looking. And I think it suggests a bit more of a kind of like the environment is almost dying. And so making something with a lot of leaves and feeling kind of lush, I wanted to avoid that, at least for this piece. It's not a concrete judgment call. It doesn't happen every time, but yeah, I'm just doing some rendering of the tree, trying to figure out the bark, the direction of the light there, the rim lighting from the moon, and the general lighting from the moon coming up. That's going to change a bit later on because I basically want to change it up and make the moon, the light from the fire be the dominant light source on the trees. That comes in a bit later. But at this point, I'm just laying it out very roughly, getting a bit of the captain hat, working the silhouette a bit better, and going through every element in the design, whether it's a hat or the hair or the tongue or the ranks or the hand or whatever it may be, and figuring out exactly what that shape is, designing every element of that shape, and making sure that I'm working my lighting as I'm doing that. So a lot of that basically happening on. I'm working, this is basically sped up quite a bit. It is a long process, even if you're very confident with what you're doing. It still takes quite a bit of time to render everything, and I really enjoy this part of the process, fleshing things out and kind of working on the character. And my philosophy is basically not to spend too much time in one place on the piece and go around, but at this point I want to get the character to a certain level of finish, just to make sure that things are working well and I'm getting the mood and the atmosphere that I want from the lighting. So I'm investing a bit of time there, trying to figure it out. Again, you can see me working here some of the core shadows and softening them up, darkening the hand as it moves away from the light source or moves closer to the light source and lighting it up. The light degradation is very important as well. I think especially when you're doing stuff like this, it lends a great deal of believability to your lighting. And it's sometimes I see people forget, or sometimes I forget, and I render lighting, or I render the object or the character, or whatever it may be, without the lighting fading away, basically, or becoming weaker as it moves away from the light source. And here you can see on the shirt, I'm kind of working that in immediately and trying to remember those principles and making sure that I don't have the same intensity of lighting closer to the fire and further from the fire. Working in the folds, laying those in where the shirt is stretching, where it's kind of losing its shape, where it's got holes in it from obviously overuse and battling with the elements. All these things have evoke emotions and evoke feelings about the character, and it's important to pay attention to those details. I think it's always a good idea to keep enhancing your storytelling. Like you'll hear me saying this endlessly. Every time you get an opportunity to add, at some point you're gonna probably cross the point and say, okay, I've added enough, and I feel like it's becoming too big of a deal. But there's a lot of these small, somewhat insignificant or not as important elements that are happening throughout the character. Oh, the rip in the shirt there, or the long beard there, but they all amount to one big message, which is this guy's been in the wild for a long time, and he's starting to lose it, and he's not the man he was when he started piloting that plane, and he's kind of losing his humanity. And I want to demonstrate that, and I always tell people that I work with, or as I'm art directing, always push something, exaggerate it to the point where you're breaking it, because it's always good to push ahead and then go back rather than not push enough. So here what I'm doing, once I felt a bit more comfortable with where I was with the composition and the graphic design and the silhouettes, I wanted to give a quick color test just to see that I'm on the right track. We'll get into coloring this piece a bit later on, but what I'm doing here, and there's so many ways to approach color on a piece: painting directly with opaque brushes or semi-translucent brushes and just go for it and just paint it, overlay your colors in different layers, whether it's a color layer, an overlay layer, or a dodge layer, and I tend to use all of them depending on the necessity. If I need the subtle color changes, I'll go with more of an overlay or like a screen or something like that. And sometimes I want like a really strong, punchy, saturated color. I might do a color dodge or whatever the piece demands. There's no real rules, because I'm not asking. My questions are not like which adjustment layer should I be using. My question is, what effect do I want to get? Do I want to intensify the lighting in this part of the image or not? Do I want the lighting to be saturated, desaturated? And you can see I'm pushing the weirdo lighting that I had, that I got inspired by the Creepy magazine cover. These crazy orange skies, which kind of works here in a way. It could be Magic Hour or Crazy Hour, where the funniest shit and the craziest stuff happens. Usually in films you see that. But this is where the part after I did enough color manipulation, I just go in and paint. What I did do is I made sure that I flattened all the layers, and I have a smaller version of this image that I'm working on. It's not the initial concept piece that I'm building, which is a lot more higher res. I'm working faster. I'm working in color. This is a sketch. I don't really care too much about accuracy within the shapes right now. All I'm trying to get is an interesting color relationship. I have almost like a split complement, the green not really versus the red, but more versus the orange. And similar to that piece again, I'm like getting inspired by that creepy piece and creepy cover, and kind of seeing if that works for me. Am I pushing again, trying to stay true to what I was calling initially the big idea. Is it what it needs to be? And you can see that I'm kind of bringing the background down in saturation and bringing the foreground up in saturation and intensity and contrast. Again, questions that I ask myself is, what do I want to focus on? Once I did that for a bit and I'm comfortable with it, I go back to rendering my high-res environment or high-res piece. Basically, now that I've pushed the character for a bit, I'm focusing on the plane and rendering that for a little bit, trying to figure out all the elements there. I made kind of a big decision there at this point and decided that the plane should be dark and merge with the mountains. At first I had it lighter, but because the environment itself, the background, the far mountains and the sky were getting lighter, the plane was getting lost. I think actually that was a good decision that I made, because it's the plane being creepy and dark adds to the overall creepiness of the piece. So it kind of goes from a happier piece to a bit more of a somber piece, and this large wreckage is looming in the sky. You know, it's dark and scary. Yeah, once I pay enough a bit of attention to that, again, back to the character. That's the advantage that you see here of working in separate layers. I can turn stuff off and go back to the silhouette. My silhouette was initially rough because everything again was blocked in, and now I'm going in and cleaning everything up. I'm like, okay, I'm getting close to a final in terms of what I want for this character and this image, and I just want to make sure that I do this properly, and I clean up all the little residues and you know, lasso tooling everything and making sure that all my elements are well defined and separate. You can see I made the leg here a bit bigger because I felt like the perspective, or it had a bit of a fisheye feeling to it, a bit too much by that leg being really foreshortened, that left leg. So I'm kind of balancing it out. Still, there's a, I wouldn't say fisheye, but there's a closer and further from camera is pretty exaggerating the character, but it is a bit more subdued. Yeah, and as you can see, just keep working the rendering. Now I know where my elements are. I'm defining the skin, legs separately, shoes separately, pants separately, all on separate layers. So I can go in and easily define and render each element separately without affecting the other. Again, same principles, lighting from the bottom, main lighting from the bottom, secondary lighting from the top, complementary rim lighting, and just rendering that shape out and making sure that everything feels three-dimensional. It's also very easy to basically when I render everything around the same intensity, and because it's on a separate layer, I can then go in and knock back light degradation within the render, so I don't keep everything on the same value. And it does feel like it's receding away from the light. So you can work however you're comfortable. You can factor all these things in immediately. You can factor in later. Yeah, just working the material as well, making sure that, you know, the skin looks like skin and pants look like pants. Making sure that my core shadows and cast shadows are happening there. The belt is casting a cast shadow on the stomach. That needs to be fairly sharp. A little bit of belly button action there. The ribs, you can see them. Getting to the shoes, which I really wanted to do in a bit of a different material. The shoes are a bit shinier, well, significantly shinier than the skin, and they pick up a lot of light, especially the shoe closest to the fire. It's literally blown out with the amount of light that it's picking up. Even the feather shoe, because the material is a bit more of a lacquer type of shoe, whatever's left of it is picking up a lot more light, reflected light from the fire, and that kind of separates the material. Always good. I know this is kind of like we're getting into tertiary ideas of rendering, but once you figure out your big shape and your silhouette and you figure out your big form ideas, then you can go into materials and figure those out appropriately. Now going into that kind of like Dead Man's Hand and figuring that one out. Again, it's going to be a bit of a focus color-wise and rendering-wise. I'm setting a light hand against a dark beard. So again, light element versus a dark element to make sure that it pops off in the image towards the end, because that's part of my story. The crazy captain going cannibal basically and eating his crew. So I'm working on that idea. Again, casting the shadow from the bone, not forgetting the principles of lighting, no matter what my graphic design is. Still, and this is where I kind of decide to make the beard a bit longer and make sure that I got a stronger graphic design of a dark shape or a light shape, which is the hand, being silhouetted against a dark shape, which is the beard. So you'll see that the questions that I'm asking myself at all times are, is this Am I communicating the story well? And the story is that the captain is a cannibal, so I want to showcase the hand. And in that case, my answer is, well, I want to intensify to make sure that the hand is recognizable even from a distance against, and it's light, so I want it against a dark background. What can I use? Oh, he's got this beard. Here's my solution. So this is kind of like I guess I'm always keen. This is my thought process, and what I want to say by that is when I have the opportunity to talk to artists, I'm a lot more interested. I never ask people about what brushes they use. I really don't care about that type of stuff. What I'm interested in is the thought process. What caused you to make the decisions that you've made in the piece that I'm looking at. And I think that's where the real magic happens. It's that dialogue that you have with yourself, as I mentioned, about figuring out what do you want to say and how do you want to say it. And I think that's really, really important to keep that dialogue going. And I'd recommend, honestly, if you have a chance to talk to other artists, peers, or people you admire, you want to ask them stuff, my questions are usually around thought process and what attracts them to make the pieces that they do is more the human factor rather than what kind of canvas do you use, what kind of pencil do you use. I've heard those questions a lot, and the processes are so individual it really doesn't matter, at least in my mind.